toast those things over the fire, even though the toasted ones might be a light toast. And we'll just kind of refresh that, and then we're going to hit it with something, I don't know. And then the sauce that we're going to do, and this, all right, so we're sipping coffee, just got off the phone with Tank, and this is spicy chili crisp, and so we were just digging through Shane's cabinets, and he said, "You ever tried this?" I was like, "No, I never tried it." Smell that, it smells so good. So we're gonna do that with some peach preserves and season it, but we're gonna glaze those birds once they're done with just a little bit of fruity, spicy thing going on. So, you got anything to add to that, Chip?
Yeah, I think to kind of go to the spontaneity part of what Tuffy's talking about cooking, and I would say it comes with a little bit of experience in restaurants. But one of the questions that people ask me all the time is like, "Oh, you're a chef. What's your favorite thing to cook?" And I'm like,
What time of the year is it?
and I always say eggs, and they're like, "Eggs? Yeah." And then they sort of like, "Okay." But for me, when I started doing barbecue, I read all the books that were available, and I think I told some stories about, I went and talked to big famous barbecue guys, and in French kitchens there's a term called staging, and it basically means you go work for free for the master, right? And I staged all over France and Europe when I was younger, and I'm going to guys like Chris Lilly and John David Wheeler, and I'm like, "Hey, can I come work in your kitchen for free?" And they're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And they're like, "Yeah, all right, dumbass, come on in." But you know, I kind of ran the gamut of all these barbecue rubs and sauces and tasting, and then I started saying, like, man, these all kind of taste the same. So then I started like just fucking around with stuff and trying, like, you know, I would go in my restaurant. I had a spice room, and it was a whole wall of like little resealable jars, and I had 200 different spices. And I just started trying stuff and making my own rubs, and you know, doing, like, Tuffy has great stuff. Like, if you don't have his cookbook, go buy it because it's got great shit in it.
Where did you get it from?
Anywhere you can buy a book. Like this umami one is a great one. Like, I used to do a porcini rub. Porcinis are mushrooms, and it's like, you know, mushrooms when they're dried, it's a huge umami bomb. And so, like, kind of go back when I started with the spontaneity, like, especially going with somebody like Tuffy at the grocery store. And I don't ever go to the grocery store with a grocery list, except for, like, you know, toilet paper. And I'll literally just I love grocery stores. Like, I really do. I love grocery stores. And I'll just walk around. And I'm like, "Oh, I'll try that. I'll do this. I'll do that." And I started to apply that to barbecue. So I always tell people, you don't have to stay in the lane of, you know, North Carolina style or South Carolina style, what your people made when you were growing up. There's so much cool shit out there, and you know, you're just using smoke. This is a big Tuffy thing. Smoke is flavor, it's seasoning. You know, it's not. You got to get out of that barbecue mentality.
Treat smoke like salt and pepper,
Exactly.
like a seasoning.
So that's, you know, us sitting in my house drinking coffee, and I'm like, "Hey, let's use the chili crisp." I don't know if anybody's ever had that. It is awesome on, like, anything. It makes like eggs and chili crisp. I make them all the time. We do a chili crisp rub bacon every once in a while. But it's kind of like when you go start cooking barbecue, don't think about just, I gotta have the rub, I gotta have the sauce. Go outside the box and just kind of have fun with it.
You know, Shane talking about treating smoke the right way. I think a lot of us in this room can relate to buying our first smoker and building the fire, and the smoke's coming out of the stack, and you're like, "Man, smoking! That smoke's supposed to be coming out of that stack." I started making barbecue and bringing it to my neighbors, and my neighbor Sue Brown, who lives across the street, she's been my neighbor for over 20 years. I'd bring her over barbecue, and she'd say, oh, I'd knock on that door, Miss Brown would answer it, and I'd say, Miss Brown, I got some barbecue for you. She'd be like, oh, great, Tuffy. And I kept doing that. One day I knocked on her door, Miss Brown answered it. I said, Miss Brown, I got some barbecue for you. She goes, you know, Tuffy, I still got some of the last barbecue you made for me. And I realized right then and there, she didn't want it. And why? So probably the two biggest mistakes people make in barbecue is they over smoke it and they undercook it. Nobody likes tough barbecue. They talk about a rib that's fallen off the bone being so delicious. That's because nobody likes tough barbecue. When you really get, I'm sure James probably spoke to a little bit of this in his rib demo, but when you really get good at making ribs, it's got a nice gentle chew, but it doesn't fall off the bone. So I'm gonna spatchcock this. We just kind of like took my culture shears through the ringer down here, so it might not. This is not always the prettiest thing in the world to do, but anybody, if you've never spatchcocked a chicken, it's just super simple. We're just gonna cut this spine out. Like I said a minute ago, Shane was cutting the tips out, but I like to just use those tips to kind of do a little presentation, whether I'm doing a whole bird or spatchcocking one. So we left them in. You know, let's talk about rubs. I like people to buy my rubs, but I like to teach people how to make rubs. So I got rub recipes on my website, which are just free. If you get my book, I'd appreciate it, but there's a lot of rub recipes in there. Shane and I probably can relate. I didn't do a lot of dried spice blends when I first started cooking. I mean, it was a lot of salt and pepper and a lot of fresh herbs and things like that. And it wasn't until I got interested in learning how to cook barbecue that I started playing with rubs. So if you want to make your own rub, if you're in this room and you've never made a rub before, I think the first thing you need to decide is it going to have sugar or not? And then if it's going to have sugar, what kind of sugar is it going to have? I like to use turbinado sugar a lot. I like the way it sprinkles. I like the way it works on food. But, you know, Cary, they do a West Tennessee dry rib, and on the smoking process is just salt. And the seasoning, the barbecue seasoning, doesn't go on until after the ribs have been cooked. And I think I'm right. You have very little salt in your seasoning.
Very little salt.
And no sugar, right?
Yeah, no sugar.
Yeah. So he's coming in, and I really like listening to Cary talk about how they make their ribs and the origins of it. But if you want to make your own rub, it's like, is it going to have sugar? Is it not going to have sugar? I got 3 rubs up here, and 2 of them don't have sugar. My barbecue rub, my sweet rub, that has sugar in it. And then it's like, and it's going to have salt, in my opinion. Whether it's a lot or a little, I tend to lean a lot on salt. So you probably won't like my rubs if you don't have an affinity for salt. But you know, what's the balance between sweet and salty? You know, and it's so easy for us to do. And when I'm developing rubs, I'm doing really small increments. So so I'm starting with tablespoons and quarter cups and teaspoons. And so one way we might be able to start is maybe it's equal parts of salt and sugar to start. And then we're going to come in with our fundamental foundation flavors. We're going to come in with granulated garlic. I prefer granulated garlic and granulated onion over powdered garlic and powdered onion, and it's the way it pours and sprinkles better, so I like that. When it comes to like cumin and coriander, peppercorns, I like to take from seed. You can't do it in big quantity, but you certainly can do it in your house. I like to take and toast cumin seeds and chill them and grind them. I like to. Coriander is interesting, and actually it was one of my cooks that worked with me one time. He said, smell coriander and think of Fruit Loops. And I was like, man, it smells like Fruit Loops, and it does. But coriander is interesting to me. I like it both ways. I like it toasted and ground, and I like it just dried and ground too. And there's some lemon notes that come from it. But when we do fresh ground black pepper and fresh ground spices, those flavors become so big. I used to drive all over the country missing my son's little league baseball game, and going to a barbecue competition. The only reason I got into competition barbecue is I figured there were a lot of people there who knew how to make barbecue, so I'll go there and pick their brain and learn. And That's the only reason I started doing that. But as I was driving around all over the country and spending all this money and missing my son's Little League games, I started thinking about my spices one day, and I was like, do I have the freshest spices and rubs possible to go spend $1,000 to $1,500 to go do a barbecue contest? And it's just like a radar, it's like a awakening. And I thought, man, I bet you I got nutmeg that's been in my cupboard for 15 years. And so I went home and I cleaned out my cupboard and I started buying smaller quantities. But I think if we're going to babysit a rack of ribs or we're going to babysit a brisket or a whole hog, I think fresh seafood is really good. Got anything about